the gremlins and computers out of our control. Hopefully everyone got to take a deep breath. Okay, here we're back on schedule. So next up, Howard, give us an overview of what's going on at End Violence since the Solution Summit.
Okay, thank you. And thanks Lisa and Apolitical for hosting today. Thanks everyone for joining all over the world and from various institutions and sectors. It's great to have such a diverse group on the call today. I thought what I'd do, Lisa, is just frame for everybody so we level set on the backstory, getting quickly to the summit, and then where we are now and where we're going. If everyone could go on to mute, that would probably be great. I think, as you all know, the Global Partnership to End Violence was established in July 2016 with three overarching aims. The first was to build political will to end violence against children. The second, to accelerate action, progress on the ground. And the third, to strengthen collaboration. And I think in the first 20 months or thereabouts of the partnership, 3 or 4 cornerstones of progress and success were firstly around promoting evidence-based solutions, in particular the INSPIRE framework. Secondly, for establishing a protocol and a process around so-called pathfinder countries, where support has been provided for those governments working across sector in their countries, putting plans together to make strategic, tangible impact on the ground for children. Thirdly, establishing the partnership itself, growing now to about 271 organizations and governments who are members of the partnership, be more individuals. And fourthly, the first Solutions Summit held in Stockholm earlier this year in February, which was a very successful inaugural convening of people across sectors. I think 40 governments were represented at ministerial level, as well as 300 or 400 other participants from across UN agencies, bilateral donors, civil society, the private sector, media and academia, and children themselves, who came together with a shared interest and a shared agenda around ending violence against children. But also, I think those of us who were there, I had the great privilege to be there before I started as executive director of the partnership. And it was a very informative, it was very inspirational, it was very energizing. It was a lot of networking and learning and sharing of what's working and what's not working among all those who were there. So it was a very energizing moment. And I'll come back actually when I close my opening remarks in a few minutes to say why I think that, not just because of the Solutions Summit, but I believe that we have a real moment of opportunity right now. And when I say we, that's the wider we in the ecosystem, in the partnership and beyond, all those of us individually and in our organizations who care and are trying to do something to make sustainable change and end violence in all its shapes and forms for every child, wherever they may live. So right now, I'm in 2 days' time, I will have been in the job for the whole of 3 months. So I know a little bit more than I did when I joined, and thanks for many of you on the call who I've already met or spoken to or been in touch with by email, for the very warm welcome, for all the advice and the support. And we for sure need it, because we are, I think, the strength is in the diversity, the breadth and depth of the community that we have in the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. And right now we are in that transitional phase from a startup initiative to actually scale up. And when I talk of scale up, it's not scaling up ourselves so much as scaling up the impact of the partnership. And that's going to mean a few things. And really going forward, what we are proposing, and we recently had approved by our governance body who oversees us, is the outline of a new strategy or an evolution to the strategy, which starts to look at all that we have been doing. It looks at the success we've had, which I summarized just now, and where we feel as a secretariat to the partnership that we can add the most value going forward. So there are four broad areas. The first is around what's actually happening on the ground in countries to change children's lives. And the language we're using around that is brokering the support that's needed to accelerate country-level progress. The second area is around brokering, consolidating and sharing data, evidence and stories that both inform better programming, but also inform advocacy to make the case for ending violence against children. The third and fourth areas really closely aligned are around catalyzing a global movement and mobilizing more resources for everyone who is working to end violence against children. And part of that work is really going to be about getting this issue more truly onto the global agenda, which means building on the rights-based case for ending violence against children to make a more sophisticated, evidence-based investment case for why, not just writ large and the economic gains, etc., which we've seen figures that are out there, but sector by sector, why does it matter for every sector to invest in ending violence against children? And I firmly believe, and all the evidence I've seen so far suggests very strongly, that the case for doing that is because violence actually undermines every other investment in children, whether it's their health, their education, their broader well-being. And we know it has lifelong consequences for many children as they become adults. And we also know that the effects then become intergenerational and get passed on as those children become adults themselves, and the children that they then have or have around them. And the fourth area is an investment fund, which we currently have and which is under review. And our ambition is to make that to continue with catalytic investments to support the broader work of the partnership, but through the review of the investment fund to make it more accessible, more flexible, more nimble, and to raise more resources for that. We don't have a particular resource envelope in mind, but we just, at the first instance, it's really about the flexibility, the governance, the nimbleness, and what those funds can be used for against that broader strategy. So just to close out, as I said earlier, I think we do have a real pivotal moment right now. We're our North Star, if you like. We're inspired by SDG 16.2. That's what guides us, trying to end all forms of violence, abuse, and neglect against children by 2030. We are guided by solutions such as the Inspire framework. We're fueled by the progress we see in Pathfinder countries. We have 20 Pathfinder countries signed up today, and we have as many again who are in conversation with us on a journey to become Pathfinder countries, which is great to have that demand, if you like, of governments signing up to want to make faster progress. We also had the success of the Solutions Summit I mentioned, and also I think there's a very important global contextual piece where behaviours which have long gone tolerated, unacceptable behaviours which have long gone tolerated, are now no longer being tolerated. And whether that's the Me Too movement, whether it's issues about safeguarding in the aid and development industry, or behaviours in other sectors and among leaders, etc., I think there's a growing groundswell I can see in the zeitgeist, if I can call it that, which is not specifically about children, or is not all about children, but is a changing awareness, understanding, which I think will lead to broader social norm change, which we need to both accelerate, contribute to, be part of, and leverage to change that broader environment in which all of this work happens. So I think we have a real moment, we have real momentum, and it's incumbent on all of us, and I say this certainly to myself and the team that I sit with, to do our part to seize that moment that we collectively have created over the last few years. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Lisa.
There you go. Thanks, Howard, so much. If you all want to write down any questions you have for Howard, you can pop them into the chat box here on Zoom, and we'll come back to them at the end of the call. Kim, if you could go ahead and queue up the Solution Summit video, that'd be fantastic.
Sure.
Being one person that is carrying a lot of other people behind, I feel so humbled for that. It has been my first time to be in plane, first time to be in other country, first time to be in such a cool place like this.
A very warm welcome to all of you to Stockholm. It's so inspiring to see so many people who traveled to show their commitment and engagement to the urgent need to end violence against children. It is time. Let today be the day when a true movement takes off.
I think this summit is a hugely important moment because I think we've established a consensus that violence against children is unacceptable, it's preventable, and we have the means to actually end violence.
We're talking about results, ideas that people have put into place in various countries around the world. Some people say children are the future. I would argue and say children are here and they are now.
It is very important as the children to be in this summit because we are going to be the new generation in the future. We're going to be the mother and the fathers.
Kids are the victims, and sometimes adults cannot understand the situation because they can be a part of the problem.
I dream of my country, Tanzania, not just remain known as the home of Mount Kilimanjaro, but where every child will be free from violence. I'm not telling my dream because it's so unique, but because it's also the dream of my friend Leticia from Paraguay. It's also the dream of Monica to a beautiful country, Indonesia. Living with violence is not living. Thank you so much.
In the many years we have thought to address violence against children, we have never been so poised for success.
The UN Sustainable Development Goal on ending violence says that we're going to eradicate this problem by 2030. That's what the target of this Solution Summit is.
There's only 12 years to deliver that promise. And now we have finally got to a place where there is global recognition that there can be a world without violence.
The beauty of the Sustainable Development Goals is that they're a kind of declaration of interdependence.
If we safeguard the protection and safety of children, in fact, we will give an opportunity for all the other goals to be achieved.
A problem of this magnitude cannot be solved by one single sector or actor alone.
Violence against children is everyone's business. It is a collective responsibility.
We have a framework, the Inspire frameworks, and something, frankly, of an unprecedented agreement among international organizations.
Enforce the law. Change negative social norms and reinforce good ones. Create safe environments. Support parents. Ensure adequate incomes. Strengthen response mechanisms and insist on violence-free schools. One of the objectives of this summit was that we all leave today believing that we can end violence against children. And I believe we can. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
What I need from this summit is that all these words that we have been having be turned into actions that will change our futures to be bright.
Thank you, everyone. And soon a copy of that will be available to share with others. So we'll make sure that you all get that. I'm now going to switch to the Apolitical platform, and it's really meant as an offer for all of you working on violence against children to learn what other countries are doing, learn how others are supporting how to end violence in the lives of kids in very concrete ways. So I'm just going to share my screen here and give you a little tour. Some of you were at the Solution Summit. So if you can see, one of the really important things about Apolitical, we are a network of now more than 130 countries using our platform to discover and find what's working in policy around the world. And in the discovery piece, we heard a lot that people in government wanted to see how issues intersected with one another. They wanted to break down the silos between all the different departments and how policy is usually done. And so I start showing you our front page, which shows all the different issues that we're doing deep dives on. Everything from gender equality, which clearly intersects with violence against children, to public health, to education, to early childhood, and cities. So we really bring this together to show how violence prevention intersects in many ways. What we do is we have formulated, with the support of the Global Partnership to End Violence, an editorial board. Some of you on the call are on that board that really guide the curation of case studies and analysis and policies about what's working to end violence in the lives of children. And we really bring a consumer technology look and feel to it to make it easier for people in government and those who are working on the issues to find what you need. It has smart AI behind it and machine learning to really pull up the types of policies and programs that you're looking for. We take a lot of use from behavioral science to write about policies in new ways so that they're easier to understand. So you can see here, this is the violence prevention policy topic. The most read, we'll just do a quick, the most read are mapped where is hitting children legal. So we do a lot of look at sort of what's popular, what are people looking at. Treating violence like a disease helped cut Colombia's murder rate by 82%. So we do analysis where we go in and really try to tell stories. So using storytelling to talk about policy in a way that's more useful to people. We tell you how long it takes to read it, how it's intersected with other problems, other sectors, other solutions. We always connect to, when possible, references. So if you want to go in and learn more about this is kind of a summary piece to the larger policy. We have also mapped, and this will go to the expert roster that Kati will soon talk about, those people inside and outside of the government working on violence and other issues that can be contacted. This map is growing very quickly. Here's some folks we have in London who are working on it. So you can come in and you can find out who are potential partners that I can work with and contact them. We also have an Ask an Analyst function. So we do a lot of taking in questions from people in government and CSOs saying, can you help me connect to? Is there an example of? How can I find out more information? So we're really a service that really is meant to support the violence prevention field through curating and connecting this knowledge in this ecosystem. So with that, I'll pass it over to Kati, who can talk a bit about the expert roster and how that might be a service to people on the line. So Kati.
Thank you, Lisa, and hi everybody. Thanks for joining us. So we wanted to give you an idea of how we're going to use the technical capacity that Apolitical brings us and the connections to us as a partnership where we can offer content on violence prevention. So we're the content version and the technical version. We're bringing those two together for you and all the practitioners in the field. So in June, we're going to be launching the expert roster system in a pilot sort of way. We're meeting with 3 different types of experts that we understand are often requested from the field. One will be on social norms, another will be on income and economic generation, and the third will be on data collection and evaluation and monitoring. So these are 3 typical areas that as research practitioners and field operations stuff. After the pilot has experts in each of the Inspire strategy areas, as well as across regions of the world, and as well as by language and skills and capacity. So we're going and that list has been vetted by our peers at the World Health Organization and several CSOs and NGOs. So that larger list will be made available later. So when we pilot in June, what will happen is we'll be measuring with Apolitical the uptake. Do people use this? Do governments ask questions? And do practitioners in the field or NGOs or even like a UNICEF practitioner, would they be using this service? A simple question to the service might be, we're going to do a violence against women program and we're looking at the policies and we really want to impact children as well. Can you help us? And then Apolitical and the Global Partnership will work through all of our networks to get you the best answer to that question as quickly as possible, using all of our experts that we have available to us. A more complex question might be, we know what we want to do, but we don't know how to do it. And we would, at that point, say, well, you might be interested in some implementation science. We can link you up with some real experts in implementation science, start discussing with them. If you'd like them to work with inside of your country or through long distance. So these are just 2 examples of a simple question versus a much more complex and evolved question that we'll be answering on the service. So at the end of about 3 months, in September, we'll be analyzing the data, looking at insights and trends from these this piloting, and then we will be opening up the larger roster and seeing if it's compatible with the needs in the field.
Great, thank you. And keep those questions. We're almost ready to go to you to answer all of them. I'd like to just finally turn it over to Ed, who is the lead writer on violence prevention. Many of you throughout the Solution Summit met him. He'll tell you an example and sort of give you a sense of how we write stories. We will soon be moving to accepting opinion pieces, op-eds, content from the community itself. So we'll keep you up to date on that. But for now, Ed does the creation and the editorial. So Ed.
Hi, thank you. So on my screen, let me know if it works. Can you all see the Kenya story? Perfect. Great, so as Lee said, I'm Ed. I'm the lead reporter on violence prevention. Essentially, my job is kind of going around finding out what's working in the field and transforming that kind of insight, those sort of insights that experts have into readable, interesting, quite snappy material. One project that started out in Kenya, specifically in Nairobi, it's kind of, there's two parts of it. The first part of it is that it's a self-defense program for teenage girls. And the second part is that it's a kind of educational gender program for boys that includes kind of intervention training. It has been remarkably successful at the rate of rate by around 51% among those who participated. And as you can see on the screen, essentially what we do for this kind of story is we break down all the most important information into boxes. So you'll be able to see the kind of results and impact, the immediate kind of headline figures of what the data's showing, what this program's doing on the ground. We'll outline the key parties and explain precisely who's involved in the implementation, if there's been any government involvement, etc. We look into exactly how it's done in a short kind of few sentences, snappy overview. We'll tell you where it's done, who specifically it targets, what the kind of cost and value of the project is, and since when it's been running. What's also really important in our reporting is that we show the hurdles. I think everyone on this call is probably well aware that what works in one circumstance won't necessarily work in another. And so it's particularly important for the kinds of stories that we want to tell to really focus in on what are the kind of local complications, what are the hurdles that had to be overcome. We also deal with the replication, and then we get into the story. In the story, what we're basically doing is explaining how this project came to be, what the kind of key insights from it are, not only showing kind of what's working, but exactly why that's working. In order to do this, what I'll usually do is reach out to the person or persons who are behind the story and interview them for their insights and try and get the kind of down to the nitty gritty of what exactly did work, what didn't work, what would they say to kind of other practitioners in the field. As Lisa mentioned before, there are references at the bottom for anybody who'd like to check up on the stats that I mentioned or to read a little bit more on the topic. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Lee, who was the kind of designer and developer of this program, they can. So this is actually only one kind of story that we tell. We also tell, for example, stories about prisons and policing. And this is a Q&A that we did with Chandra Gold in South Africa, who I'm sure many of you know. This is kind of really deep, go deep on a kind of single issue. Another kind of story that we're really interested in is a much sort of longer feature-style storytelling approach. This story particularly was about post-conflict therapy in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in how helping men to deal with their trauma reduced the rate of violence against women and the rate of violence against children. So our understanding of the kind of violence prevention field is fairly broad. Children are sort of at the heart of it, but we're also very aware that solving violence against children also means dealing with violence against women, violence in the home, the various different kinds of violence that intersect. And so if you look on a dedicated violence prevention feed, you can see a kind of whole range of stories from all over the world in various kind of formats and with various different experts attached to them. One thing that we are really interested in, as Lisa mentioned, is getting much more op-eds and kind of broadening our coverage even more. So if anybody does have a story that they think would be particularly kind of interesting for us to cover, please do get in touch with me. I can pop my email address in the chat box on this call. But essentially we're interested in anything that's a kind of new approach to violence prevention, an approach that's really, really working wonders, that has the kind of data and evidence to back it up. And also projects that are kind of scalable, projects that can be taken at a kind of national level. We're really interested in all those things, so if you have any stories, I'd strongly encourage you to get in touch with me. I'm available anytime to chat if you would like, and I think that's all from me. So yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Two last things. Just, I know how important Inspire has been to the field, and we have been tagging for Inspire throughout. So a lot of the technology behind this allows you to find things from different tags. So Inspire has been very important in how we think about how we curate stories and how you can find stories. So there's consistency in the field, because I know so many people have worked hard to make this consistency happen. The last is one of the things that we hear from governments is that it's important to make these stories more popular in mainstream media, that about solutions that we can, as Howard started, we can prevent violence in the life of children, and we have to continue that narrative so we believe it's possible. And so we work very, very closely with mainstream media to tell stories, and social media to get it out in the world with really great success. So know that it's not just about the platform here, which is meant for you as a tool, but also to bridge to the mainstream world. So with that, I will turn it over to questions so we can hear from you all. I've asked, and I see already some of you are putting questions in the chat box. The first one is around the expert rosters. How do you get the information, names of experts? Do you send out requests to your members' networks or post the request somewhere? Is there a set criteria? Kathy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So we did work quite hard on this for over 6 months. Sabine, my colleague who sits at WHO and is part of the partnership, worked with us on this. So there was about 6 months of development. We reached out to our different forums that we have, from meetings like IPSCAN or SBRI and the experts that were presenting, all the way through our known and trusted partners in the field. This was then in turn vetted by many people who sit on our editorial board to make sure that we really got the best and quality people. So it's a lean list, but it's a very thorough list. So and we'll always be updating. It's iterative. There's always new people coming in. An important aspect of this is that it's not just international consultants, but it's regional and national consultants as well. We've teamed up with No Violence, and we're bringing in some of the experts from that work as well into the process. So a consultant that's needed, national, regional, or international, will be available.
Great. Other questions that people have? Anyone have any questions for Howard? He outlined the strategy and where end violence is going. Or other questions people want to bring up? Anyone? How are Pathfinder countries selected and held accountable? Howard, do you want to take that one?
I will. Thanks for the question. At the moment, what happens is governments, usually somebody within the government in a country, approaches us and says that, because every government, as you know, has signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. So every government's ultimately accountable to delivering across the SDGs, including SDG 16 and therefore SDG 16.2. So you could argue those which are sort of smarter and ahead of the pack put their hand up, approach us and say, that they want to get their act together, they want to take a more strategic approach, and then we work with them to make sure they have a few fundamental pieces in place. That includes a focal point within government. It includes convening a multi-sectoral group across the different sectors, and that group then puts together an action plan. The action plan, the best action plans are also costed. And they have an implementation and a roadmap, and they have a framework for monitoring what's actually going to happen. So that's the process at the moment. A nuance to that as we evolve forward, and we are in this transition moment, as I said, from startup to scale up, is that we are happily overwhelmed with demand. So as I said earlier, we have 20 countries who are Pathfinder countries right now, and as many again in conversation with us. So we don't have the resources to service all the Pathfinder or would-be Pathfinder countries in the way that we have been. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because most of the expertise that's needed exists either in the countries concerned or internationally. And one very good example of that is Apolitical's work and is the expert roster that Kathy just mentioned. So the evolution, when I used the word broker earlier on, that's the best word we've stumbled across for the time being, until someone gives us a better one, which is really when we see that there is demand, usually for technical assistance, for finance, or for solutions for evidence and learning, for knowledge, that our role will be to broker the connecting that demand for those things to the supply. As I say, it can be provided locally, it can be provided by donors, it can be provided internationally. And let's also remember that our agenda is universal. So it's not only in countries who receive ODA, so ODA eligible countries, low income countries, it's a universal agenda. So within the current mix of Pathfinder countries, we have Tanzania, we have Uganda, we have the UAE, we have Sweden, Japan. So there's a very diverse mix of developed and developing, or low income and high income countries already as pathfinders. The other thing to say is, and I'm giving a slightly longer answer than you probably wanted, but how the process works, is that we also encourage every country which signs up to be a Pathfinder country, both to make an explicit public commitment, because I think that's important, we think that's important domestically, but also to consider the role, their global or regional role as well. And that can be just sharing the lessons of what's worked, where again, the role we have in consolidating that and sharing what worked and what doesn't work with other countries in real time. And for some countries which have the resources, it can be providing technical or financial resources for those trying to pursue this agenda elsewhere in the world.
Great, thanks, Howard. There's a question in, does the process currently include local civil society?
Yes, it does. And some of the most powerful, or where I think we see some of the most powerful progress is where government and civil society in country are already working together. In fact, just earlier today, I've just signed a letter back to the Brazilian government, who's been in a conversation with us about becoming a Pathfinder country. And alongside a letter from the government of Brazil, I also received a letter from Brazilian civil society representatives. So I just give that as a very real-time example, literally in the last 24 hours, of civil society working hand in hand, but also advocating and nudging their own government to act and to take the steps in that. So that's probably the best example. And that's what we would encourage to happen elsewhere as well. Catty, if you want to ever jump in on any of my answers, then please do. You're being very refrained.
You're doing well, boss. Yeah, just to add that we work really closely with the CSO forum. And so we were previously having regular calls, and we're beginning to reassess how frequently we should have calls, because we know that civil society and NGOs are the drivers of change on the ground, and they are the ones that will implement and get this work done. So we're very committed to both local and international NGOs, and look forward to working more with them.
Howard, you're popular today. Another question for you. What are the plans for the next Solutions Summit? Where would it take place and when?
Great questions. I think all I can say for certain now is that there will be another Solutions Summit, and we're in an active conversation with our board right now about when and where that should be. And what we're doing, just to give you a little bit of sort of insight behind the curtain, as it were, is we're looking at a global calendar of events in the next couple of years. And within that, we're thinking when and where best can we hold the next Solutions Summit. So we're looking at a variety of large events in the UN calendar, such as the High-Level Political Forum in 2019, when governments will all report against progress against the SDGs. We're looking at other events beyond the UN calendar that take place in broader social impact philanthropy space, in the corporate space as well. And within that, trying to figure out when is the best moment, where is the best moment, and also just what the next Solutions Summit could be, because the first Solutions Summit was very powerful, it was very inspirational and informational, as I said earlier on. But the success we're now seeing suggests that even that same format wouldn't work again. For those of you who had the privilege to be there, you or have seen or heard about it, there's a report, by the way, about to issue on the summit. Thanks to Apolitical and others for putting that together. You may remember that most of the Pathfinder countries had a role in speaking about their work in a plenary environment. Well, that wouldn't work again because of the near doubling that I forecast in the next few months, and let alone beyond that, of Pathfinder countries. We've also had feedback from those people who were at the summit, provided, I think, wanting a little less plenary, a little more working groups, a little more interactivity, etc. So we're thinking through both the feedback we've had, the moment in the crowded calendar of the next 2 years where we can have maximum impact, but really being driven by what is the purpose and the objective of the next summit, to share solutions, drive progress forward, have inspiration, and also therefore where, not just when and what it should be, but where it should be held. And there's a strong case for holding it in another part of the world. Obviously this one was held in Europe, the first one. There's a strong case for holding it perhaps in Africa or Asia or elsewhere. So we're looking at all of those variables. If any of you have strong views about any of those variables, then please do get in touch with us, because over the coming months, I hope we'll be able to get to a decision on the next summit by the end of this calendar year, if not before, because that's kind of the run-in time we're going to need of 18 months or so, I think, to have a really successful second solution summit.
If I may add as well that the first summit was very much about building political will, and we really have a huge momentum going now. It will always remain critical to the partnership to continue that will building. However, we also are now looking towards accelerated action, because we have, as you saw in the film, we're halfway through the SDGs, and we need to start implementing, and we need to move to implementation and actual rigorous and quality reporting on data and evidence. So that will probably likely be an important theme for the next summit is reporting back after the will. What is the accelerated action and where is it going?
We really hope at Apolitical to be part of the momentum building by telling the stories that you're all working on in the field about what's working and success. So Ed just put his email address in the chat box. You're welcome to get a hold of us anytime. We want to show momentum when we can. I do hope, Howard, that no matter what, around the next summit, that we still have children involved. They were the highlight for so many of us in the summit, and having their voice is such a critical component. With a few minutes left, I want to make sure if anyone else has any questions or thoughts. Well, any last words, Howard, from your point of view, or Kati?
I think it's a very neat landing place to land with the children themselves. And thank you, Lisa, for that reminder that the voice of children that came through at the summit. I think I saw Sarah Stevenson earlier on this webinar, and she played a foundational, fundamental role in the Secretariat, both in the summit but more broadly, in making sure that in all the work that we do, that we factor in how to, in a very real way, involve the voices of children. I'll be honest, because my operating mode is transparent and honest, that right now that's an area where I know that we need to pay more attention to. So for the next summit, for sure, but more than that, in all of the work that we're doing, and all of the advocacy that we're doing, and all the work on the ground in country, etc., we need to redouble our efforts, I think, to make sure that the voices of children are not just heard, but they're listened to, and that they have a genuine and a monitorable role in actually designing what happens around them, that's actually ultimately intended, of course, to end violence against them.
That's great. Well, I'll leave you with all, we'll be in touch to make sure you all have Ed's email address, if you don't pull it down here, and that you all have access to the platform so you can use and share the stories and continue to give us feedback. On the implementation point, we're in the middle of planning implementation science, really practical, how do you implement these programs, ideas from real life case studies and show and tell. We'll be sending that information out as well. We really want this exchange between all the parties here to be super practical, useful, and advance the agenda for the kids and for everyone. So with that, thank you very much. This will be recorded and sent out in case you have colleagues, and be in touch with us anytime with any questions.
Thanks so much, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.